David Taub with GV Wire here with Eric Bischoff, and I'm going to say it, the second most important wrestling executive in history, and he will be at Fresno Grizzlies game on Sunday. Eric, thanks for making the time today.
Hey, I'm happy to do it.
And I hope your arm is warmed up. I hear you're going to be throwing out the first pitch.
Almost deadly.
Well,
I may have another career.
Well, it's a 105 first pitch, so fans want to get there a little early. Even though they're calling it Pro Wrestling Night, it's a day game. So, Eric, the question I want to ask you the most is, why did you think you could topple the WWF and Vince McMahon when nobody else could? What gave you the guts to do so?
I don't know if there's any one thing. I think I've always been a very competitive person. And to me, it was more, why not? Why couldn't I do it? Or why shouldn't I be able to do it? Than it was anything else. And it's just, again, a lot of it is just my competitive nature. But part of it also was looking at the WWE's product at the time, talking about the early, mid-90s, and recognizing that the 9-year-old audience was underserved. And it occurred to me that by targeting the 18 to 49 male audience, I would be able to be competitive in a segment of the audience that, like I said, was underserved by WWE, and it obviously worked.
Now, did you get any support or any resistance from the WCW corporate structure at the time?
Zero. That was one of the beautiful things. And I think I was blessed with the opportunity to work in television, and particularly working for Turner Broadcasting at a time when Ted Turner was still at Turner Broadcasting, obviously, at the time. And Turner Broadcasting was a very entrepreneurial environment, and a lot of that had to do with Ted. Ted was a mega entrepreneur and a visionary, and a lot of Ted's philosophies and the things that Ted believed in were about taking chances and taking risks and doing things that hadn't been done before. And I had a lot of freedom as the president of WCW. I had virtually little to no contact with the corporate side of Turner Broadcasting for the longest time. And I was allowed to do what I felt I needed to do to be competitive.
So part of the main aspect of wrestling, and any business for that matter, is knowing what the audience wants and delivering it to them. So how did you figure that out, to deliver to the audience what they want, and you reap the rewards?
I think a lot of it was just driven by my instincts. I had been in the business since 1987 when I started with a small promoter in Minneapolis, and I had a pretty good sense of the wrestling audience as a result of that experience. And then having worked at WCW for a couple of years as a talent, not as an executive, but that also gave me an insight as to what the audience was feeling and looking for. And it was just a combination of things, really.
And then is there a point where you realize that some things are working and you go with that more, or some things aren't working and then you decide to stop that? I mean, how do you have that instinct to know when to go full bore and then when to pull the plug?
Well, that's one of the advantages of doing live TV every week, is you essentially have a couple million people in a focus group. And you try some things and you see what the audience reacts positively to and what creates, a buzz. And you watch out for the things that the audience reacts negatively to, and, kind of put those on a list of things you don't want to do anymore. So it was really just one of the advantages of having a live television show. Gives you a live focus group every single week.
Right. A lot of people think of you as Eric Bischoff, the wrestling personality, but you're also Eric Bischoff, the manager of a major aspect of a major corporation. So how do you manage such a diverse group of personalities in wrestling on top of running a corporate entity?
It was a little bit challenging at times, in no small part, because when I started in the industry, I started as a talent. I didn't start on the business side, for the most part. I was in AWA when I started in 1987. I was involved in sales and syndication, and that was indeed the business side of the wrestling business. And that's what I learned first. But not long after I started with AWA and working on the business side, I ended up in front of the camera ultimately hosting a show Monday through Friday on ESPN. And then I went to Turner. But by the time I got to Turner, I think most people recognized me more as a talent than somebody on the business side of things. When I got promoted in WCW and kind of moved up the ladder, so to speak, there were some challenges. Just probably getting the confidence and credibility amongst my peers was probably the biggest challenge. But that didn't last long. In success, you can collapse that cycle pretty quickly. And fortunately, we got successful very quickly. And before we knew it, we were outperforming the WWE head-to-head competition on Monday nights. And that kind of eliminated a lot of the doubters, so to speak.
And then just such a wrestling's obviously a unique business, and their course they offer MBAs. They teach lots of courses on how to manage not just necessarily a wrestling company, but any company, Fortune 500 or your local home builder. I mean, how do you manage when you have 100 people under your stead who probably have 100 different goals? How do you manage that all? How did you learn that, or how did you develop that instinct?
Probably born with the instinct to a certain degree, but really it's trial and error. It's just digging in and doing the work and learning how to manage different personalities. Again, I knew a lot of the people that, ended up working for me. They went from being my peers and people that I just knew to people who were actually reporting to me. And there was some there were some issues there, personality kind of conflicts and chemistry conflicts. But for the most part, it was trial and error, and you just kind of learn it. You learn as you go.
Is there anything, one incident that happened that maybe didn't go so well that you helped teach you, or a learning experience for the next time?
Well, I think there was, to this day, when you're dealing with people and you're dealing with a business like professional wrestling or entertainment in general, you're dealing with, you're in a business that changes every day. You're in a business with, variables and surprises and challenges that, you can't learn about in school, you can't anticipate. And in some cases, you had never experienced before because it never happened before. And that's just a matter of, I guess, using your head, apply some common sense in the first, in the beginning, and work through it. I can't think of any one incident that was kind of like a memorable moment from a business point of view or a management point of view that, the lights went off and the bells started ringing. But it's just a process. It's the only way I can describe it.
So you're launching live airing or a tape-to-live show in Fresno on Sunday. Why take your show on the road and why launch it in Fresno?
Well, Jeff Jarrett, who I've known for a long, long time, is pretty active in minor league baseball and had some contacts at the Grizzlies. And Jeff called me and said, "Hey, would you guys, like to do a podcast at the plate?" And number one, I just love the environment of minor league baseball. It's just a different vibe than professional baseball, Major League Baseball, I meant to say. It's just a different, it's more of a family event. It's less pressure. It's more fun. It just has a different vibe. And I love taking the shows on the road. We've taken our podcast on the road and done shows for live audiences around the country. In fact, around the world. I'm heading to Scotland in the UK in September to do the same thing. And I think, wrestling fans all over the world, so many of them are longtime fans. And the nostalgia factor is a big reason that, this show, my show, does as well as it does on the road. But it's just fun getting out in front of people and interacting and doing, question and answer kind of formats and all of that just makes the show a better show.
And might we hear this show eventually on one of your podcasts distributed?
You very well may. You very well may. If not the entire episode, possibly segments of it for sure.
So the podcasting world, especially wrestling, it's really exploded in the last few years. I know your show has just been on the air or been on podcasting for 5 years now, and you're ranked number 7, at least caught into the charts. That's a pretty significant accomplishment. Can somebody, a personality like you and the podcasters who distribute your show, can they make a full-time living doing this?
Well, I do, and it gets tougher every day because there's more and more people doing it. There's more. I'm going to use the word cluttered. I don't mean that derisively, but there's just more of it out there. And just about anybody that spent more than a month or so in the wrestling business comes out with a podcast. And it's a crowded marketplace, but we've been around a long time. Like we said, 5 years. Just a couple of weeks ago, we celebrated our 5-year anniversary. But I think because, I spent close to 25 years on national television in prime time, in a pretty significant way, ended up being, a big part of the WWE for several years, in the early 2000s. And I think that exposure and that relationship that I developed with the audience over that period of time certainly gave us a leg up and a big advantage. But, it's tough, like any business. I can't think of a business out there that's legal. That's not really difficult. It takes time. It takes commitment. And it's the same thing as producing live television. You've got to kind of learn what the audience is reacting to and what they want to hear more of and what they want to hear less of, and just kind of evolve and adapt along the way.
How many hours do you have to prepare for, I think you put 2 shows out a week? How much prep time goes into those shows?
Well, we do. We've got a gentleman by the name of Derek Sabato who does a lot of our research, and he probably spends the most time doing research, and then he kind of submits an outline or a format to us based on the research he did. And then Conrad Thompson and I, or John Alba and I, depending on the show, we'll kind of go through that outline, and we'll pick out the things that we feel will be the most entertaining or the most interesting for the audience. So my end of it, this is going to sound horrible, but I don't like to prep too much, because I think some of the magic, at least in my show, is the improvisational nature of it. I don't like to have too much of a kind of written in stone approach to a show before I do it.
You probably need some spontaneity, right?
I love the spontaneity, and it's a lot of times I'll see something in the research, and it's a question about something that happened 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 25 or 30 years ago. And I could spend a lot of time doing the research, so I may be able to give more specific details to a certain question. But my natural reaction sometimes is a little bit more entertaining for people than a canned, detailed research response. Right. I don't think when people turn into my show, they're looking for details. They're looking for specifics. They want to know, who did what to who and what caused what and why. But they also want to be entertained. And sometimes focusing on details and information comes at the cost of being spontaneous and entertaining. So I try to find that balance. There are times I wish I could be more specific and remember more details. But oftentimes, if I don't remember something, I'll just admit I don't remember. It was 25 years ago or 20 years ago or 10 years ago or yesterday. I don't know. I couldn't tell you what I had for breakfast yesterday. But I'm honest about it. I do the best I can with it. And then, we get to the answer. My co-host, Conrad Thompson for 83 Weeks and John Alba. John is very, very good and detail-oriented. Between the two of us, we get to the details. But I try to be, like I said, as spontaneous and entertaining as possible.
Right, and one of the podcasts is Strictly Business. So let's talk a little bit about Strictly Business. How are the revenues for your shows?
Strictly Business is relatively new and is starting to pick up very well. In fact, as a new podcast, a new launch, it's probably gained more momentum than my original podcast, 83 Weeks. And part of that is because I've been able to leverage the audience we have for 83 Weeks, let them know about Strictly Business, cross-promote it. And Strictly Business is an entirely different show. Strictly Business focuses on the business of the wrestling business. We don't talk about, who tried to take somebody else's girlfriend out on a date or who did what to who in the locker room, or we stay away from the stories and the personalities and the drama, and we focus on what makes the business of the wrestling business tick, what makes it work. Because there's a lot of the professional wrestling industry is a far more complex and sophisticated business than people who are not in the business can even imagine. And all you need to do is kind of look at what's going on in WWE right now. This is, WWE is a major, global, publicly held company that does business all over the world, and it was recently sold for $9 billion. Well, you don't get to be that big unless you're a very sophisticated business. And in the entertainment business, like I said, it's very complicated. It moves very quickly. It changes very quickly. And you have to have a lot of people that know what they're doing to keep it going. And I think focusing on the business of the business is something that a lot of wrestling fans are interested in, because it's not something that they hear talked about much. When you talk about all the wrestling podcasts that are out there, many of them are hosted by former professional wrestling talent. And while professional wrestling talent knows a lot about what goes on inside of the wrestling ring and what works and doesn't work, and psychology and all the things that go into the art form of what happens in the ring and what people see on TV, very few, if any of them, have ever had to spend 5 minutes understanding the business of the business that takes place outside of the wrestling ring. And that's the perspective that Strictly Business gives them.
Right, and business for you is going well. I mean, obviously you expanded. You're doing 2 shows a week, so your business must be doing pretty well.
We're doing very well. I got back from New York last night. I did some shows just outside of New York in Connecticut, ironically 10 miles from WWE's offices. But I did a show in Connecticut in Thursday night, and then I'll be with you guys in Fresno, and then Monday I've got a commitment that I can't really talk about. So I'm going to be in another major city on Monday. So I'm really busier now than I thought I would be. I don't know that I want to be a whole lot busier than I am at this stage of my life. I enjoy I love what I do. I need to do what I do as part of who I am. But I also love, I've worked real hard to build a life here in Cody, Wyoming, right outside of Yellowstone National Park, that I enjoy very, very much, and try to spend as much time at home as I can. So it's a balance, but we're doing very well. I'm blessed and very grateful.
And finally, I know you talked about your recent health scare, and it was a very compelling podcast to listen to. So I'm sure you might be telling that story on Sunday. So the questions I have for you is, when you go through a life-death situation that you went through, is it true that you see your life flashing before your eyes, or what are you thinking when you're about to get to the operating table and you have to go on a life flight helicopter to another hospital? And what's going through your head in such a dramatic and traumatic moment?
It was so bizarre, and it's hard to describe, because I am perfectly healthy. I've never had health issues in my life, really. I've had injuries, but they were all self-inflicted. I've never had any kind of issues medically or health-wise. And what happened to me a couple weeks ago was self-inflicted. As I talked about in the podcast, I decided to take a supplement and didn't read the directions on the supplement, and ended up having a very adverse effect to it. So I think for me, it was such a shock. It's not like I had this long-term illness and I, had been dealing with it and the risks and the consequences of it and all that for an extended period of time, like some people unfortunately do. This was, I'm sitting there watching television one night at 9 o'clock, and I'm in the emergency room almost dying at 2 in the morning. It just happened so fast that I didn't have time to think about much. I didn't see my life pass before my eyes or anything like that. It got serious a couple times, and I had to pull my wife aside and say, okay, look, if this doesn't go the way we hope it's going to go, here's the information you're going to need to know. Here are the people you're going to need to contact, business-wise, because I do have a lot of other things going on beyond the podcast, and wanted to make sure my wife knew where all that information was and who to talk to if it didn't go well. But aside from having that conversation with my wife, I have a lot of faith. I'm a fairly spiritual person, and I just wasn't worried about too much. I was aware. I knew that it could go bad, but I wasn't really too worried about it. And I think that's more because of my faith than anything else.
Well, that sounds very calming. Well, thanks for sharing that. And once again, thank you so much for your time, and look forward to seeing you on Fresno on Sunday and hearing your podcast, and I'll probably have a chance to say hi in person.
I I hope you do. I would look forward to that.